And I think it's very useful in a plot-intensive book not to let the book take you. You know, there is a certain amount of that you want to have happen, but ultimately, sort of I say, you know, I still have kids in college. The book doesn't. And I want to know where that book is going and not wake up one day as I don't know if anyone knows the name Otto Penzler. He's sort of like a senior guy in this industry, and he once sort of told me, you know, I won't name names, but he goes, oh man, you know, this guy just called me, and he's a top author. He goes, Otto, I'm just so depressed today. And he goes like, why? He goes, oh man, I'm only on page 138 and my hero just died. I didn't laugh.
That is not a good strategy.
No, it's not funny to me, sort of. No.
So we're dealing with this issue of how we write, how we create fiction, and what part of reality it is. And I'll tell you a little bit about my experience, and I'll use that as a segue for a question. So in December of 2007, I sold my first novel to St. Martin's Press. It was called Top Producer. And I wrote about a Ponzi scheme in the public markets. And 12 months later, Bernie Madoff confessed. 12 months. And so I called my agent one night, and that night on December 12, 2008, but who remembers? I called my agent, I called my editor, and I said, my novel just came true. So what I'd like to ask the panels, when you've created fiction, we try to put people in jeopardy. We're really a bunch of sadists when you get right down to it. We do awful things to really nice people. Have you created fiction that has come real or perilously close? Steve?
Well, the nature of my themes, I think, are such that it's an ongoing process. That is, if you buy my premise that there is this sort of fundamental transformation that's been occurring, not just in law, but in other legal institutions, and in other institutions that are not legal, then I'd have to say the answer is yes. That you can see in the way big firms, for example, big law firms, which is something that I'm most familiar with, have continued to develop and evolve over the last, my book's been out less than a year, but you see the same trends really locking in. You see some of the same things that I hinted at come to fruition in, for example, the failure of a very large and prominent Washington firm that some of you, probably many of you have heard of, Howry. The firm in my book does not dissolve, but a lot of the same tensions that ultimately undermined Howry, I believe, are really central to what has happened throughout the profession is reflected in the book. So I'd say yes, it's been sort of interesting in that respect.
My books each deal with a medical, ethical issue. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of my books resonate with real things that are going on. The scariest and the most unpleasant have revolved around my first book called The Sisterhood, which is about a secret society of nurses dedicated to mercy killing. And if there was a way to do mercy killing right, these nurses do it right. They're the very best nurses, and they do it because they feel they have to in the interests of their patients. And subsequent to the book being published, two incidents that I know of happened. One was that I got a call from the state's attorney in Georgia that a nurse had just been arrested for 9 murders in the intensive care unit, and they found a copy of my book marked in her locker. And subsequent to that, another nurse, this one in Texas, called, her name was Janine Jones, and you may have heard of her in that she was administering a drug to kids to stop them from breathing so that she could save them. And The Death Shift is the name of the book that was written about her, and they found a copy of that book in her locker as well, with the passages circled in the book. So many times people have paid attention to what I've written, and mostly it's in a positive way. I wrote a book called Flashback, which was about people who had a new anesthetic when they were operated on, and woke up thinking that they were asleep and looking as if they had been asleep, but at one level of their mind, they were wide awake during the operation, and eventually a trigger sends them back into the OR, and they relive their surgery, this time without any anesthesia. It turns out that I'm now the patron saint of an organization called Anesthesia Awareness, which you can Google and look up. It's now a very active organization of people who have been through this experience, but actually were wide awake during their surgery with no way to tell anyone they were wide awake because they're paralyzed during the surgery by a drug called succinylcholine.
What are 3 questions you'd like to ask a bunch of best-selling authors? And so I got hundreds of responses, and I've called through all of them. And this comes from Sarah on LinkedIn, and I will read it verbatim. What is the hardest question you have ever tried to answer in a book? Michael, we got a sense of that. We got a sense of that from your previous answer, but what's the hardest question?
I don't know if I could just pluck it out of thin air. What is the hardest question I've ever tried to answer?
In a book.
Who am I?
What am I doing here?
Every one of my books. I'm actually asking that question in every one of my books. And it's the most important thing is for me to learn something about myself and how would I react in that situation. And I recently was just talking with a friend about the book that I'm working on right now, and in it a woman receives a secret message at a bar from one of the guys down the bar, and she can't even find the guy, but she's there with a girlfriend, and she looks at her best friend, and she looks at the message and realizes this is something that her best friend can't know about. And so there's an incredibly tense moment between these two women, and I'm now wondering what I would do if this was my best friend that I was with, and how would I dodge the fact that I open the message, it's right there, it's something that they can't know about, and yet they're waiting to hear the message, and that has to do with learning about myself.
Right.
So,
Steve.
Why do people behave sometimes in self-destructive, inexplicably self-destructive ways?
Good question.
I think that's the, if you could figure that one out, and that's the question. I mean, that really is it. I see a lot of it, and I ask myself all the time, why?
I'm caught up in the concept of everyday heroism, and one of the elements that's in every one of my book is an ordinary guy that anyone in this audience would recognize who has to go up against forces that are a lot darker and a lot larger than him, and it involves a decision of will I measure up. So I think that's the recurring question that's always at the heart of mine.
I just, my novel, The Gods of Greenwich, is coming out later this month, and the question that I ask is, what would you do to keep up with the Joneses? All right, if you happen to own a hedge fund and your sole goal in life is to join the glitterati of Greenwich, and that's sort of the question I'm dealing with, and I think you have to start any novel with a fundamental question like that.